Hey guys, welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to talk about Jordan Peterson. At this point, we all heard about Jordan Peterson, haven't we? So, just to give you guys a little bit of a background information, Jordan Peterson was formerly a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto in Canada, and he became really famous after his debate of the merits of Bill C-16 in the Canadian Parliament. And this bill had to do with the enforced usage of pronouns, preferred pronouns for transgender individuals. He was arguing against it for various reasons, such as it would hinder free speech. Now, admittedly, Jordan is an interesting figure, right? In that he managed to capture so many people's minds and hearts, in particular, young men. A lot of people in our society today are so used to neglecting young men because we deem them as privileged. We say that males have privilege and females don't. So he is, as a consequence, one of the few that do actually pay attention to this population in a sea of a society that ignores men's issues by and large and focuses heavily on women's issues, whether that's justified or unjustified. His beliefs aren't necessarily explicitly mentioned by him because he does tend to be very dodgy and doesn't really answer questions clearly. On multiple occasions, he was asked whether he believes in God or not, and he usually says, "What does belief mean?" Which doesn't really make much sense if you actually think about it, because it's a binary question. It is clear, however, that he does have deep faith in the Christian tradition, based on how often he mentions the Bible, and specifically the Old Testament, particularly the chapters of 1, 2, and 3 in the book of Genesis. And he's recently come out with a series in the Daily Wire about the book of Exodus, along with other scholars. To me, that makes him more of a Christian, but of course I could be wrong because, like I mentioned, he doesn't explicitly answer the question, even though he talks a lot about the Christian faith and how profound it is, particularly in the figure of Jesus, which is something that's very interesting for someone who's a public intellectual to say. In all, I would say he is a force for good. There's a lot of benefits to listening to Jordan Peterson, especially given his background in psychology and his understanding of how psychological data explain a lot of the things in the Bible. He goes really in depth on how such a belief, i.e. Christianity and the Bible, tend to shape our way of thinking and behaving, particularly here in the Western Hemisphere. However, there are some downsides to Jordan Peterson. For example, he is hyper-rational, which oftentimes takes away the element of pure faith that the Bible talks about. Now, this doesn't mean that faith is reducible to non-thinking. In fact, such a faith is empty. It doesn't have any meaning, and you should probably abandon it. The hyper-rationality that I'm talking about is the kind of rationality that's rigid and that is myopic, which means tunnel-visioned. Jordan Peterson oftentimes comes off as someone who is very tunnel-visioned when it comes to his understanding of faith and the truth. And he's not able to ground that truth, that scientific truth that he often talks about, in a foundation that's solid. And to me, it's obvious, especially based on his understanding of the Bible, that that can be best explained by the biblical narrative, especially in the person of Jesus. Another thing that I want to mention is a lot of times he says a lot while at the same time saying nothing. And that goes hand in hand with his hyper-rationality. As an intellectual, he oftentimes gets too caught up in extracting meanings from concepts that aren't really that hard to understand. It can come off as presumptuous, but again, this is just my assumption. I don't want to make it seem like this is who he is, because I certainly see him more as positive than negative, in my view. The problem with that is you go down a rabbit hole that you're not necessarily meant to go down in order to extract the fundamental truths from that concept. Oftentimes, one of the best ways to explain things is to make sure that they apply to the general population, because if only a few people understand you, then what good is what you're saying? Unless you're obviously talking to a room full of scholars, in which case, of course, you want to use more technical and difficult terms. So in conclusion, do I recommend listening to Jordan Peterson? Absolutely. I think that he is a very good source, not just for human psychology, but even, I would argue, the Bible and Christianity. However, I would say that he should not be your main source of knowledge about the Bible and Christianity because of the reasons that I mentioned earlier in this video. He does have a lot of deep psychological insights, I'll give him that. But his spirituality, even though he does strike me as a believer, as I mentioned earlier, is very shaky and not firm, because he goes off on different tangents and doesn't put the data that he knows about on a foundation that is solid. And that foundation, I argue, is the Bible itself. I hope this video was helpful for you. Thanks for watching it. Don't forget to subscribe for my channel for more interesting and thought-provoking content. I'll see you in the next video.